Moving on, youth activists from around the world are attending the Youth4climate summit in Milan to encourage more collective action on the climate crisis. The event opened with impassioned speeches from Vanessa Nakate and Greta Thunberg, who chastised global leaders for making empty promises on climate change and for failing to meet funding pledges to help poor nations adapt to the crisis. The more than 400 youth activists gathered at the summit will lay out an agenda ahead of the crucial COP26 climate summit in Scotland in November. Their proposals will be brought to climate and energy ministers, who are meeting in the same venue for their pre-COP26 meeting later in the week.
And as we know, there are far too little evidence of the $100 billion per year that was promised to help climate-vulnerable countries to meet these challenges. In fact, those funds were promised to arrive by 2020, and we are still waiting.
Net zero by 2050, blah, 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 net zero, blah, 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 climate neutral, blah, blah, blah. This is all we hear from our so-called leaders. Words that sound great, but so far has led to no action. Our hopes and dreams drown in their empty words and promises. Of course, we need constructive dialogue, but they've now had 30 years of blah, 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 and where has that led us?
U.S. generals gathered on Capitol Hill today, where they were grilled by senators in their first congressional hearing on the chaotic final days of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Lawmakers pressed Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Generals Mark Milley and Frank McKenzie on their decision-making as it became apparent that the Taliban were overwhelming U.S.-backed Afghan forces. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin told senators the Taliban's lightning takeover had caught them off guard, saying the U.S. may have put too much faith in the former Afghan government. Lawmakers also demanded details on the suicide bombing that killed 13 American service members, while some assert that the withdrawal has left the U.S. more vulnerable to terrorism. General Mark Milley admitted the real possibility of al-Qaeda re-emerging in Afghanistan under Taliban rule, but insisted the U.S. remains capable in containing such a threat.
Avoidable disaster happened. Why were Americans left behind? People deserve answers. How did this avoidable disaster happen? Why were Americans left behind? President Biden's decision to withdraw has expanded the threat of terrorism and increased the likelihood of an attack on the homeland.
The fact that the Afghan army that we and our partners trained simply melted away, in many cases without firing a shot, took us all by surprise, and it would be dishonest to claim otherwise. Those first 2 days were difficult. We all watched with alarm the images of Afghans rushing the runway in our aircraft. We all remember the scenes of confusion outside the airport. But within 48 hours, our troops restored order and process began to take hold.
A reconstituted al-Qaeda or ISIS with aspirations to attack the United States is a very real possibility. And those conditions, to include activity in ungoverned spaces, could present themselves in the next 12 to 36 months.